Welcome back to the Central Oregon Silverback podcast. My name is Brian. I am a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I'm a Navy veteran. I'm the head coach at SPG Bend. I have a Bachelor's of Science in Game Design. And today we're going to be covering epistemology and how we know what we know. So imagine that you wake up and you realize that every memory that you've ever had is false. This is something that isn't just like a movie plot. Philosophers have been kind of looking at this idea for a very, very long time. Last episode, we covered the mission for the show, right? The idea that we're going to be basing everything on, truth and sincerity, in looking at being in service of society. Today we're going to be defining a couple of things and then working toward a common understanding of what truth is so that we're not having to argue about what truth is later on. So, plain language for epistemology. Epistemology is a big word that simply means the philosophical study of the nature, origin, and limits of human knowledge. It is the theory of knowledge. It is how we look at whether or not something is valid, how far it can go. And at its core, epistemology asks what separates justified belief from opinion. And that is a big thing. The nature of knowledge is super, super complex. But the interesting thing with this idea of knowledge is that every language has a word for it. It has some sort of meaning for it. And that means that this idea of knowledge is universal to the humans, to humans in general. So now we have to break down and figure out what separates justified belief from opinion. So I'm going to give you a couple of different concepts for thinking about knowledge. In philosophy, they generally will break down knowledge into three sections. Knowing that, right? We know that something is true. Water boils at 100 degrees Celsius, right? At sea level. Knowing the location of something. You know where you parked your car. Knowing when, right? Knowing when something happens or having an understanding of time in relationship to events. These are kind of three general types of knowing, right? You know when your birthday is, you know when your anniversary is, those sorts of things. But there's a huge distinct difference between knowledge and belief. So, in my opinion, belief is cheap. Knowledge is expensive, right? Beliefs can be wrong. You can believe something with absolute confidence and still be wrong. This happens all the time in jiu-jitsu. It is probably my favorite part of having new, young, athletic men come into the gym. They often think they know something they don't know, and that thing is usually fighting. Confidence can't make it true, right? A lucky guess, an educated guess, that doesn't matter. Often the loudest person in the room is not the smartest person in the room, and that's an important thing to think about. Knowledge requires evidence that connects or comports with reality. Without that, it's just a well-dressed guess, right? We're just hoping we're right. And so you can believe something, right? So perfect example of this, and this one will date. I don't like giving things that will date in a podcast, but I believe that Canelo was going to win his fight last night, 2 nights ago. And I was like, this fight should be an easy fight for him. I underestimated the absolute skill of his opponent. And I was pretty confident about it. Not confident enough that I would ever bet money on it, but I was pretty confident. Turns out, did not work out his way, right? Doesn't make either of those fighters better or worse at the end of the day. I think that was just a beautiful display of skill. But that's something I was very confident. My belief in that was I believe you win. If you told me that if it was true or not, I would say, well, obviously, 1, before the fight, I can't say if it's true. And 2, after the fight, I have to say that it is not true. And this is where we get into where belief is, right? Belief can exist without proof. Knowledge cannot. A true knowledge is always connected to the truth. And if it isn't true, then there isn't knowledge. So a lot of this is pretty abstract ideas. But here's why it matters. Every decision that you make in your personal life, in your work life, in your role in society is built upon what you think you know. It is a collection of all the evidence that you've gathered. You can't separate knowledge from belief unless you actually try, right? You can make all the confident, passionate, well-intended decisions, and they could all still be wrong. And so when you do that, if you work solely off of belief and separate knowledge from what you're doing, it will have huge ripple effects in your relationship, in your work, in your community, and there'll be consequences. And so epistemology is the foundation that helps us avoid that trap. So there's a couple of those. I also want to cover a few other things, right? So in current affairs, this is disinformation and misinformation are one of the biggest concerns of big organizations worldwide, right? With the advent of AI, with deep fakes, myths, that sort of things, you'll end up with all this misinformation, and this tool of epistemology hopefully will give you better opportunity to understand how to sift through this stuff. And it's not going to always be easy, but here's some like real world examples. You have medical myths, right? False cures, things that people are spreading on the internet that could cure you, right? If you eat like 52 beets a day, you're never going to die, right? I remember the pomegranate company got in trouble for promoting like its antioxidants. Financial decisions, right? Investing in the stock market based on rumors or inside information, right? Which is illegal. And you could end up losing everything, right? We're talking, economic collapse stuff. Policy debates. In policy debates, when we cherry pick certain pieces for information and then we leave out the other parts that are important, right? If we're talking about crime, or we're talking about poverty, or we're talking about food insecurities, those are easy to get tripped up on and not realize. And epistemology gives you the tools to spot the difference before you commit the time, money, and trust to a belief that you do not know is true. And that will save you a lot of heartache in the end. So that's the goal, right? I'm going to be talking a little bit more about this next episode, but here's your challenge, right? I want you to pay attention for the next week and think about every time you say, I know. And then ask yourself, do you really know this, or do you believe this thing? Because if you just believe it, you got to be careful with saying, I know. So, between now and then, catalog each time that you said, I know, and think about it, right? That's an important thing to do. And then if you enjoyed this episode, like, subscribe, all that sort of good stuff. And until next episode, keep serving the greater good.